Welcome to our 13th edition of Spooky Interviews from Spooky Ventures. This time around, Rick Hale. When did you first become interested in the paranormal, and what triggered that interest?
Hi, Gary, and thanks for having me on the show. My interest in psychical research began at a really young age. I was about 8 years old. It was 1982, the summer of 82, and I encountered and interacted with an apparition in my grandparents' house in Franklin Park, Illinois. Um, Got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and she was standing she came out of my grandparents' bathroom into the hallway, and she reached down and touched my chin and said with a heavy Irish accent, "My, what a fine boy." And I watched as she turned and then walked away and just sort of disappeared. So yeah, ever since then, I had an interest in this field of inquiry and research and investigation. And I did my first investigation when I was 17 years old. So there was quite a long time between my initial encounter and when I actually took up the mantle of investigator.
You've written some books on the paranormal. Can you tell the viewers about those books?
Yeah, I've written 3 books on the subject of the paranormal. My first one was called The Geek's Guide to the Strange and Unusual, Poltergeist, Ghosts, and Demons. And the second book was called Behold, Shocking True Tales, and some other spooky stuff. And the third one, which just recently came out, is called Bullets, Booze, and Babes, The Haunted History of Chicago and Illinois. The first book, which came out in 2014, is basically just me telling ghosts, the classic ghost stories down through history and giving my take on them. Behold, my second book, was about my personal experiences as an investigator and a lot of things that I've learned along the way. So in that book, you're going to read about my own investigations that I've done going as far back as the the early 1990s. And the third book is sort of my love letter to the many haunted places and strange places that we have here in the state of Illinois, as well as the criminal actions that have led to many hauntings in the city of Chicago.
I asked you about the origins of your interest in the paranormal. When did you first become interested in writing, and when did you get the idea to combine those two interests?
I first became interested in writing at a very young age. Punctuation, grammar, sentence structure, it always came very, very natural to me. So, later on, I combined my love of writing and my love of reading into actually writing my own stuff when uh, it became more acceptable on the internet. Rather than having something published, I went straight to websites and started having stuff published there. And, took off from there. That was I started maybe doing that maybe 15 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since.
You are the co-host of a show called The Shadow Initiative TV. Can you tell us about that show and how you got involved with it?
Shadow Initiative TV was created by myself and Stephen Lancaster. He is another old school paranormal investigator and researcher in North Carolina. He is actually an old friend. He was a guest on some previous shows that I had hosted back in the early 2000s, and we just, have had a friendship ever since. One day he, sent me a message on Facebook and asked me, he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a new video podcast. How would you like to be co-host?" I immediately jumped all over that. I'm like, yeah, it's been about 5 or 6 years since I've done any kind of podcasting, and I've been looking to get back into it. And he gave me the opportunity. So yeah, we got some really great guests, and we talk about some really great topics. One of the topics that I'm particularly proud of on this show is one that I do called Ghost Watch. And it is a resurrection of an old Peter Underwood BBC One radio broadcast that he did back in the early 80s. Everything that you hear that I record in Ghostwatch is something that I've written either from one of my books or from spookyisles.com or paranormalstudy.com. It's everything you hear will always be written by me.
What do you have in the works now?
Currently, I'm working on a series for paranormalstudy.com called Haunted Stays. It's a 20-part series that covers some of the most haunted hotels across the United States and a few overseas in the United Kingdom. And I'm actually thinking about turning this into a book, but I'm really not completely certain on that just yet. I think I need a lot more material in order to do that. You know, Gary, another thing that I have in the works here is being an advocate for disabled people who have an interest in the paranormal. I myself am a disabled person. My left leg, I walk with a prosthetic leg, having lost it to cancer a few years ago. And I want people in the paranormal community to understand that, people who are disabled, they do have a place. You can do this just as well as any other able-bodied person can do. Your disability should not exclude you from doing the things that you love. And if you love ghosts and hauntings and investigating and research, then you can transcend your disability and be a part.
Do you remember when you first became fascinated with the horror genre or spooky things in general?
As far as the horror genre goes, I've actually been interested in it since I was a little kid. I remember watching the Son of Svengoolie, which I'm sure you remember well, being a Chicagoan yourself, back in the late 70s and early 80s. He would show really silly or schlocky type horror films, and that's kind of where my interest in horror started. And, so it was just sort of natural that eventually I would try to incorporate the two in my writing. But definitely started with Rich Coase back in the late 70s with The Son of Svengoolie.
Do you have a favorite medium, like print or film, for horror?
With the kind of medium that I like, horror with movies and film and books, love them both. I read a lot of horror novels, and I love it, being able to use your imagination while you're reading them. But my favorite would have to be our old 1970s 1960s and 70s horror comic books. I love those. I actually have a big collection of DC ghosts from the 1970s. I've been collecting them since I was a kid. They're hard to come by nowadays, but every now and then you get a little luck. You get kind of lucky and you find them on eBay, or another private seller is willing to sell them. But yeah, I love those. Love the artwork. Love the stories. A lot of them claim to be based on real hauntings, but I'm really not all that convinced that a lot of them are. But they were great, and I still love them to this day.
Who are some of your favorite horror creators?
Are two authors actually of dark gothic vampiric type horror fiction. First being Poppy Z. Bright, and then the next being of course Anne Rice. I love both of those, and I think anything that they write, I pretty much love immediately.
What about favorite horror books?
Some of my favorite horror books would have to be by the authors that I said. I've read through the Vampire Chronicles several times, and the book by Poppy Z. Bright that I really enjoyed was a different take on the vampire story, mythology, legend, as if you will, and that was Lost Souls, which was a really great book. And it was really cool because a couple years ago I bought a copy from Half Price Books in Algonquin, Illinois. And when I opened it up, I was surprised to see that it was autographed by Poppy, and it's actually one of my prized possessions.
Favorite horror movies?
As far as movies go, I really love the old Hammer horror films. Black Sabbath is one of my favorite horror films, and I don't think anybody did Count Dracula better than Christopher Lee. He was menacing and yet approachable at the same time, which was really quite strange. I'm not really a huge fan of zombie movies. Another movie that I really like, of course, because it's sort of silly on the surface, is An American Werewolf in London. I love that movie. If I will drop anything and everything that I'm doing to watch that movie. That's my favorite books and my favorite horror movies.
We can't live by spooky alone. What other things captivate your interest?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of interests outside of the paranormal. Some may consider my interest to be somewhat spooky, but architecture is a big love of mine. I love old homes. I live in a 100-year-old farmhouse myself, and I really love Gothic Revival architecture. And the city of Chicago really has a lot of great places that are just fantastic representations of that. And music is a big part of my life too. I love everything from classic rock to metal, industrial, and goth rock. Usually my music tends to be a little bit on the dark and loud side. But that's one of the things I love. And I think one of the biggest things that I love is spending time with my family, with my wonderful wife, Jamie, and my great little boy, Theo. He's 10 years old. And, it means they mean the world to me. And those are definitely my interests outside of the paranormal.
Have you created works in other areas beyond horror, spooky territory?
Yeah, actually, I wrote a sci-fi short story for Paranormal Underground magazine. It was called An Unhealthy Obsession with Anal Probes. It was kind of a comedic take on the so-called phenomena of alien abduction. I suggest that you look it up. It's really actually quite funny. It got a lot of really good feedback. But other than that, no, not really. I'm really not much of a fiction writer. Stick primarily to writing about ghosts and hauntings and that kind of thing.
If you could sit down to dinner with any three people, living or dead, with whom would you be dining and what would be on the menu?
I have to say that the three people that I would like to sit down and have dinner with are all dead. I know, shocker, right? Anyways, the first one would have to be my greatest inspiration, both as a writer and as an investigator, Mr. Peter Underwood. Long-time investigator and researcher of anomalous phenomena. And, some of his books were some of the first books that I ever read as a kid, and really learned a lot from them. And the other two are the lead singers from two of my favorite bands, the first one being Ian Curtis of Joy Division, and the one and only Mr. Peter Steele from Type O Negative, only because I really love their music, and I am a huge fan of both of theirs. They really raise the bar on how, rock and punk and post-punk and metal should be done.
What else would you like the viewers to know about that we haven't touched on in this interview?
I guess we've come to the time for some shameless self-promotion. Check out my 3 books, The Geek's Guide to the Strange and Unusual, Poltergeist, Ghosts, and Demons, Behold, Shocking True Tales, and some other spooky stuff, and third, Bullets, Booze, and Babes, The Haunted Criminal History of Chicago and Illinois. You can also find work by me at spookyisles.com and currently at paranormalstudy.com. And, be sure to watch the Shadow Initiative TV Friday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, at the Label 13 YouTube channel. So I just wanted to say thank you, Gary, for having me on the show. It has been a pleasure, and I hope we could talk again soon. Thanks. Bye.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.